Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are reading Journal Collection number 67, dating from the year 1876. And this one does not begin with an editorial biographical update, it begins with an entry from Emerson himself. So, with that said, we will go ahead and read that. On Saturday, February 5th, received through the post office a packet containing a silver medal, on one face bearing the profile of Carlyle, with the name Thomas Carlyle inscribed, on the other face, in commemoration 1875, December 4th. A card enclosed reads, To R. W. Emerson from Alexander Macmillan, London, for which welcome and precious gift I wish to write immediately my thanks to the kind sender. Editor's Note: In March, Mr. Emerson read a lecture in Lexington. An invitation from the Washington and Jefferson Literary Societies of the University of Virginia to give an address at their commencement pleased him as a token from the South, and he accepted it, and went with his daughter to Charlottesville in June. He was hospitably received, and read there "The Scholar" in lectures and biographical sketches. On November 8th, at a meeting of the Latin School Association in Boston, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the reopening of the school after the evacuation of the city by the British, he gave his pleasant reminiscences of his school days. His remarks were reported in the Boston papers of the next day. The year's journal, hardly begun, or rather the journal of more than half a century, closes with a poem of William Allingham, sent and signed by the author, whom Mr. Emerson valued, enclosed between the leaves. It might seem perhaps a grateful tribute of a disciple to a master. End note. Poesis Humana. What is the artist's duty? His work, however wrought, shape, color, word, or tone, is to make better known himself divinely taught, to praise and celebrate because his love is great, the lovely miracle of universal beauty. This message would he tell. This message is his trust amidst the day's crude strife, with all his heart and soul, with all his skill and strength, seeking to add at length, because he may and must, some atom to the whole of man's inheritance, some fineness to the glance, some richness to the life. If he shall deal perforce with evil and with pain, with horror and affright, he does it to our gain, makes felt the mighty course of law, whose atmosphere is beauty and delight, nay, these its very source. His work, however small, itself hath rounded well, even like earth's own ball and softly tinted shell of air. His magic brings the mystery of things. It gives dead substance wings, it shows in little much, and by an artful touch conveys the hint of all. Editor's Note: Mr. Emerson, with all the temperamental difficulty he found in arrangement of the abundant material received from nature and man, had something of a business method in his bookkeeping. Besides his journals, day books, he had also a few books which might be called ledgers, into which irregularly he copied or wrote good material according to subject. Such were I.L. Intellect, P.Y. Poetry, P.H. Philosophy, L.I. Literature, T.O. Tolerance, and others less easily guessed. The editors have ventured to give here a few concluding passages of uncertain date from some of these manuscripts, which they do not find among the journal selections or in the works. End note. Idealism. Is it thought to reduce the divine mode of existence to a state of ideas is deducting with a high hand of idealism and unfastening the logic of the universe? We are mammals of a higher element, and as the whale must come to the top of the water for air, we must go to the top of the air now and then for thought. The guiding star to the arrangement and use of facts is in your leading thought. The heaven of intellect is profoundly solitary. It is unprofitable, it is to be despised and rejected of men. If I recall the happiest hours of existence, those which really make a man an inmate of a better world, it is a lonely and undescribed joy, but it is the door that leads to joys ear hath not heard nor eye seen. Each power of the mind is well in itself, as perception or memory, but we are first sensible of the miracle when these powers combine or interact. Mathematic combinations are potent only in the first degree, until powerful memory is joined to them. Then you have Archimedes and Laplace. Sensibility. The poorest place has all the wealth of the richest as soon as genius arrives. Ah, could I quicken your attention to your society by whispering to you its immense wealth of nature and genius's possibility. There are persons who might take their seat on the throne of this globe without real or false shame. The real estate of the universe is space and matter. The proprietor is intellect, and what belongs to intellect, will or goodwill. Abnormal minds. William Blake, Swedenborg, Bayman, and what other men of abnormal experience, as for example some trustworthy second-sighted or forewarned seers or dreamers, who are apprised in one country of the death or danger of their twin or brother in another country, if ever one could get a proven fact of this kind, are important examples each to the metaphysician. Blake also, who affirmed that he did not see the phenomenon as the marble, the harp, or the cloud, but looked ever through it and saw its meaning. The Zoroasters and Sibyls and oracular men, to whom we owe some profoundest sentences, are essential parts of our knowledge of the human mind, or the possible omnificence, latent but for these flashes, of the intellect. The Hindu specimens have their value. Every such mind is a new key to the secret of mind. Wonder. The most advanced man in his most advanced moment, contemplating himself in nature, sees how rude an idiot he is, how utterly unknown is the cause and the necessity, its roots and its future all unknown. A gigantic dream. Divination. I think that not by analytic inspection, but by sympathy and piety, we correct our metaphysics. Thus Hegel and Kant have become possible by the extraordinary wealth of all natural sciences, which waked and tested every faculty of thought, and thus finer distinctions could be felt and expressed. The analysis of intellect and nature, which the grand masters Heraclitus, Parmenides, Plato, Spinoza, Hume, Kant, Schelling, Hegel have attempted, are of primary value to science, like the works of the great geometers and mathematicians, and cannot be spared or overpraised. They are dear to us as vindications of the sufficiency of the intellect and pledges of future advances. They seem to the scholar to degrade all inferior and less ambitious observation as needless and of no worth. They freeze his invention and hope. They write ne plus ultra on the dizzy pinnacle to which in the thin air their almost winged footsteps have climbed. They have marked once for all distinctions which are inherent in the sound mind, and which we must henceforth respect. The instinct that led Heraclitus and Parmenides and Lucretius to write in verse was just however imperfect their success. The world lies so in heaps that it is not strange that there should yet be no painters, no Homer of our thoughts, far higher than the Homer of Greek thoughts. Intellect. There is no age to intellect. Read Plato at 20 or 60 years, the impression is about equal. The joy of the thinker in detecting his errors. I have more enjoyed in the last hours of finishing a chapter the insight attained of how the truths really stand, than I suffer from seeing the confusion I had left in the statement. Inspiration. Our music box only plays certain tunes, and rarely a sweeter strain. But we are assured that our barrel is not dead, but a live barrel, nay, is only part of the tune, and changes like that. A larger dialectic conveys a sense of power and feeling of terror unknown. And Henry Thoreau said that a thought would destroy most persons, and yet we apologize for the power and bow to the persons. I want an electrical machine, slumbering power we have, but not excited, collected, and discharged. If I should be honest, I should say my exploring of life presents little or nothing of respectable event or action, or in myself of a personality. Too composite to offer a positive unity, but it is a recipiency or percipiency, and I, and far weaker persons, if it were possible, than I, who pass for nothing but imbeciles, do yet affirm by our own percipiency the presence and perfection of law, as much as all the martyrs. A man's style is his mind's voice. Wooden minds, wooden voices. Truth is shrill as a fife, various as a panharmonium. Transition. Transition, the organic destiny of the mind. The value of a trope is that the hearer is one. 'Tis the great law of nature that the more transit, the more continuity, or we are immortal by force of transits. We ask a selfish self-same immortality. Nature replies by steeping us in the sea which girds the seven worlds and makes us free of them all. At any pitch, a higher pitch. What we call the universe today is only a symptom or omen of that to which we are passing. Every atom is on its way onward. The universe circulates in thought. Every thought is fleeting. Our power lies in transition. There is said to be a certain infinite of power which is availed us in the power press. There's not only your talent, but your spirit. Easy to give your color or character to any assembly, if your spirit is better than the speaker's. My brother Edward, with his wit, never failed to check any trifling with morals on his presence. 'Tis impossible that the divine order be broken without resistance, and the remorses, wraths, indecisions, violence, and runnings away into solitude of men are the checks and recoils. The wonder of the world at good hours, I might say whenever we go home from the streets, is that so many men of various talent, including men of eminent special ability, do not recognize the supreme value of character. In history we appreciate it fully. We all read Plutarch with one mind, and unanimously take sides with Aegislaus in Sparta, with Aristides, Phocion, Demosthenes in Athens, with Epaminondas in Thebes, and wonder how the Athenians could be such fools as to take such bravos as the Creons against these grave, just, and noble heroes. In Rome we give our suffrages again to Scipio, Regulus, Paulus Emilius, and Cato, and Trajan and Marcus Aurelius against their profligate rivals. In England we know the worth of Sidney, Alfred, of Moore, of Burke. In America we see the purity and exceptional elevation of Washington. And at this moment we see the English minister at the head of the government, the immense comfort and trust reposed in a competent minister of a high and blameless character. Nature. The secret of nature glimmers to all eyes in these days, namely that her ulterior meaning dwarfs all her wonders before the grandeur to which she leads us on. For she apprises man that he converses with reality, with the cause of causes, and her fairest pictures are only part of the immense procession of effects. Mind and nature. On this unity the emphasis of heaven and earth is laid. Nature is brute, but as this animates it, only a language, a noun for the poet. Nature always the effect, mind the flowing cause. Nature, we find, is as our sensibility, hostile to ignorance, plastic, transparent, delightful to knowledge. Mind contains the law. History is the slow and atomic unfolding, the universe at last only prophetic, or shall we say symptomatic of vaster interpretation and result. 'Tis fine that Hegel dared not unfold or pursue the surprising revolutionary conclusions of his own method, but not the less did the young Hegelians consummate the work, so that quickly in all departments of life, in natural sciences, politics, ethics, laws, and in art, the rigorous dogma of eminent necessity exterminated all the old tottering shadowy forms. 'Tis like Goethe and Wordsworth disowning their poetry. Room must be allowed for the skepticism. It was always in use that the certain belligerent minds had a suicidal or a scorpion sting scorpion talent. As it is said, the gastric juices sometimes eat up the stomach. So these have the whim to go behind the institutions also, and ask the foundation of the foundation. The guide of my guide, as M.R. asked me, and there is, as my brother Edward said in boyhood, always the other way, or as Shakespeare says, a plague of opinion a man can wear on both sides, like a leather jerkin. They are all cracked, every one of them has his egotism or mania or gluttony or vulgarity or flattery of some kind, as he has his rheumatism or scrofula or sixth toe or other flaw in his body. All I want is his sanity, his specialty of acuteness, his fluency, his knack, and I should as soon think of asking after the old shoes of an observer as after his gluttonies, or his debts, or his conceit, or whatever infirmities. Did the troops carry the battery? Sire, here is the list of the wounded. Take that to the surgeon. Did they carry the battery? Vive la France! Allowance always for the exempts, who by strong call of nature haunt the pond sides, groping for plants, as Bishop Turpin for the talisman which Charlemagne threw into the pond, or, lost in the allurement of color, mix pigments on a palette, or study the surfaces and mantles and runes on seashells, heedless of France or England or Prussia, or what the Pope, the Emperor, the Congress, or the Stock Exchange may do, or Carnot buried in his mathematics, or Kant in his climbing from round and round the steps of the mysterious ladder, which is the scale of metaphysic powers. These are always justified, sooner or later, point for point. The whole noisy fracas of politics or interest is truly and divinely recognized and counted for them, there in the spiritual coil or column. There is Sardinia and London, Rome and Vienna and Washington, sternly abstracted into its salt and essence. Transition. Ever the ascending effort, the Greeks and the Scandinavians hold that men had one name and the gods another for heaven, hell, water, cloud, and mountain. And the Edda, when it has named and dealt with the Asa and Elfin, speaks of the higher gods. See the ascending scale of Plato and especially of Plotinus. Natural sciences have made great stride by means of Hegel's dogma, which put nature and thought, matter and spirit, in right relation, one the expression or externalization of the other. Observation was the right method, and metaphysics was nature and subject to observation also. But Hegel and all his followers shunned to apply the new arm to what most of all belonged to it, to anthropology, morals, politics, etc., for this at once touched conservatism, church, jurisprudence, etc. Therefore the natural sciences made great progress, and philosophy none. But natural science, without philosophy, without ethics, was unsold. Presently natural science, which the governments have befriended, will disclose the liberalizing as well as the dynamic strength. Then natural science will be presented as such as geology, astronomy, ethnology, as contradicting the Bible. Difference of the two is, natural sciences, a circle, morals and metaphysics, a line of advance, one the basis, the other the completion. Not only transition, but melioration. The good soul took you up, and showed you for an instant of time something to the purpose. Well, in this way it educates the youth of the universe, warms, suns, refines each particle, then drops the little channel through which the life rolled beatific to the ground, touched and educated by a moment of sunshine to be the fairer material for future channels, through which the old glory shall dart again in new directions, until the universe shall have been shot through and through tilled with light. With this eternal demand for more, which belongs to our modest constitutions, how can we be helped? The gods themselves cannot help us. They are just as badly off themselves. Genius unsettles everything. It is fixed, is it, that after the reflective age arrives, there can be no quite rustic and united man born? Yes, quite fixed. Ah, this unlucky Shakespeare, and ah, this hybrid Goethe, make a rule, my dear, can you not? And tomorrow genius shall stamp on it with starry sandals. Genius consists neither in improvising nor in remembering, but in both. Writing should be like the settlement of dew on the leaf, of stalactites on the cavern wall, the deposit of flesh from the blood, of woody fiber from the sap. The poem is made up of lines, each of which filled the sky of the poet in its turn, so that mere synthesis produces a work quite superhuman. For that reason, a true poem by no means yields all its virtue at first reading, but is best when we have slowly, by repeated attention, felt the truth of all the details. Fame is a signal convenience. Do we read all the authors to grope our way to the best? No, but the world selects for us the best, and we select from the best our best. Mankind have ever a deep common sense that guides their judgments, so that they are always right in their fames. How strange that Jesus should stand at the head of history, the first character of the world, without doubt, but the unlikeliest of all men, one would say, to such a ground and such a world. Yet he dates our chronology. Well, as if to indemnify themselves for this vast concession to truth, they must put up the militia, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, etc., into the next place of proclamation. Yet 'tis a pit to Olympus, this fame to that, or were by the place of Plato, Homer, Pindar, etc. Thoughts. Against fate, thought. For though that force be infinitely small, infinitesimal against the bulky masses of nature and the universal chemistry, 'tis of that subtlety that it homeopathically doses the system. Thought is nothing but the circulations made harmonious. Every thought, like every man, wears at its first emergence from the creative night its rank stamped on it. This is a witticism, and this is a power. Thoughts come to those who have thoughts, as banks lend to capitalists and not to paupers. Every new thought which makes day in our souls has its long morning twilight to announce its coming. Add the aurora that precedes a beloved name. The distinction of a man is that he thinks. Let that be so. For a man cannot otherwise compare with the steam engine or the self-acting spinning mule, which is never tired and makes no fault. But a man thinks and adapts. A man is not a man, then until he have his own thoughts. That first, then, that he can detach them. But what thoughts of his own are in Abner or Guy? They are clean, well-built men enough to look at, have money and houses and books, but they are not yet arrived at humanity, but remain idiots and minors. Language. You can find an old philosopher who has anticipated most of your theses, but if you cannot find the Antisthenes or the Proclus that did, you cannot find in language that some unknown man has done it, inasmuch as words exist which cover your thought. Thus there is a day when the boy arrives at wanting a word to express his sense of relation between two things or two classes of things, and finds the word analogy or identity of ratio. A day comes when men of all countries are compelled to use the French word solidarity to signify inseparable individualities. Genius. Genius loves truth and clings to it, so that what it says and does is not in a by-road visited only by curiosity, but on the great highways of the world, which were before the Appian Way, and will long outlast it, in which all souls must travel. Genius delights in statements which are themselves true, which attack and wound any who oppose them. They called ideas gods, and worshipped intellect. They dared not contravene with knacks and talents the divinity which they recognized in genius. When the Greeks in the Iliad perceived that the gods mixed in the fray, they drew off. Wonderful is the alembic of nature, through which the sentiment of tranquillity in the mind of the sculptor becomes, at the end of his fingers, a marble Hesperus. But the feeling manages somehow to shed itself over the stone, as if that were porous to love and truth. Truth. Truth does not come with jangle and contradiction, but it is what all sects accept, what recommends their tenets to right-minded men. Truth is mine, though I never spoke it. Unquestionable truth is sweet, though it were the announcement of our dissolution. H. G. Thoreau. People value thoughts, not truths. Truth, not until it has passed through the mold of some man's mind, and so is a curiosity and an individualism. But ideas, as power, they are not up to valuing. We say that the characteristic of the Teutonic race is to prefer an idea to a phenomenon, and of the Celtic to prefer the phenomenon to the idea. Higher is it to prize the power above the thought, in other words, above the idea individualized or domesticated. Subjectiveness. Dangerously great, immoral even in its violence of power, the man sees as he is. Add the least power of vision, and the tyranny of duty slackens. I am afraid to trust you with the statement. The genius of Bonaparte gilds his crimes to us, but that is only a hint of what it was to him. It converts every obstruction into facilities and fuel of force, dwarfs into giants. His aim so dim before beams like the morning star, and every cloud is touched by its rays. Subjectiveness itself is the question, and nature is the answer. The universe is the blackboard on which we write. Philosophy is called the homesickness of the soul. Automatic action of thought. There is a process in the mind analogous to crystallization in the mineral. I think of some fact. In thinking of it, I am led to more thoughts, which show themselves first partially and afterwards more fully. But in them I see no order. When I would present them to others, they have no beginning. Leave them now and return later. Do not force them into arrangement, and by you shall find they will take their own order, and the order they assume is divine. Thought has its own foregoers and followers, that is, its own current. Thoughts have a life of their own. A thought takes its own true rank in the memory by surviving other thoughts that were preferred. But also thought rakes itself at its first emergence. Religion. Religion is the perception of that power which constructs the greatness of the centuries out of the paltriness of the hours. Fancy and imagination. Examples. Henry Thoreau writes, "The day has gone by with its wind, like the wind of a cannonball, and now far in the west it blows. By that dim-colored sky you may track it." June 18th, 1853. The Solidago Nemorales now yellows the dry fields with its recurved standard, a little more than a foot high, marching to the Holy Land a countless host of crusaders. August 23rd. Flight of eagle, circling or rather looping along westward. And where are gone the bluebirds, whose warble was wafted to me so lately like a blue wavelet through the air? The air over these fields is a foundry full of molds for casting the bluebird's warbles. February 18th, 1857. The bird withdrew by his aerial turnpikes. October 5th, 1857. Scholar's Creed. I believe that all men are born free and equal, quod the laws. That all men have a right to their life, quod the laws. I believe in freedom of opinion, religious and political. I believe in universal suffrage, in public schools, and free trade. I believe the soul makes the body. I believe that causality is perfect. Fate. The opinions of men lose all worth to him who observes that they are accurately predictable from the ground of their sect. Well, they are still valuable as representatives of that faggot of circumstances, if they are not themselves primary parties. But even the chickens running up and down and pecking at each white spot and at each other, as ridden by chicken nature, seem ever and anon to have a pause of consideration, then hurry on again to be chickens. Men have more pause. We are to each other results. As my perception or sensibility is exalted, I see the genesis of your action and of your thought. I see you in your debt and fountains, and to my eye, instead of a little pond of life, you are a rivulet fed by rills from every plane and height in nature and antiquity, and reviving a remote origin from the source of things. May and must. The musts are a safe company to follow, and even agreeable. If we are Whigs, let us be Whigs of nature and science, and go for the necessities. The must is as fixed in civil history and political economy as in chemistry. How much will has been expended to extinguish the Jews? Yet the tenacities of the race resist and prevail. So the Negro sees with glee through all his miseries the future possession of the West Indies and of the Southern States of America assured, for he accumulates and buys whilst climate, etc., favor him against the white. Souls within a certain quantity of light are in excess, and once for all belong to the moral class. What animal force they may retain, to the contrary notwithstanding. Souls with less light, it is chemically impossible that they be moral, what talent or good they have, to the contrary notwithstanding. And these belong to the world of fate, or animal good, the minors of the universe, not yet 21, not yet voters, not robed in the toga virilis. Fate. We are talkative, but heaven is silent. I have puzzled myself like a mob of writers before me in trying to state the doctrine of fate for the printer. I wish to sum the conflicting impressions by saying that all point at last to a unity which inspires all, but disdains words and passes understanding. The first cause, as soon as it is uttered, is profaned. The thinker denies personality out of piety, not out of pride. It refuses a personality which is instantly imprisoned in human measures. Quote, "It stands written on the gate of heaven, woe to him who suffers himself to be betrayed by fate." Hafitz. I have heard that they seem fools who allow themselves to be engaged and compromised in undertakings, but that at last it appears quite otherwise, and to the gods otherwise from the first. I affix a like sense to this text of Hafitz, for he who loves is not betrayed, but makes an ass of fate. Man's Eastern Horizon. The men in the street fail to interest us, because at first view they seem thoroughly known and exhausted, as if an inventory of all man's parts and qualities had been taken, but after the most exact count has been taken, there remains as much more which no tongue can tell. This remainder is that which genius works upon. This is that which the preacher, the poet, the artist, and love and nature speak unto, the region of power and aspiration. These men have a secret persuasion, that as little as they pass for in the world, they are immensely rich in expectancy and power. The best part of truth is certainly that which hovers in gleams and suggestions unpossessed before man. His recorded knowledge is dead and cold. But his chorus of thoughts and hopes, these dawning truths, like great stars just lifting themselves into his horizon, they are his future and console him for the ridiculous brevity and meanness of his civic life. Psychology is fragmentarily thought. One man sees a sparkle or shimmer of truth, and he reports it, and his saying becomes a legend or golden proverb for all ages. And other men see and try to say as much, but no man wholly and well. We see what we make. We can see only what we make. All our perceptions, all our desires are procreant. Perception has a destiny. Editor's note. In the last 6 years of his life, after the journals had no entries, save for a few memoranda, Mr. Emerson, though he wrote nothing, could hardly answer a letter. Still, occasionally, when urged, read a discourse near home among old friends. On these occasions his daughter always sat near him to make sure that the sheets of his manuscript did not get out of order, or even to prompt him in case he mistook a word. In April 1877 he read his affectionate paper on his native city, Boston, at the Old South Church, and a year later in the same place, The Fortune of the Republic. In the spring of 1879 he read Eloquence at Cambridge, and also The Preacher in the Divinity School Chapel, where 41 years before he had startled his hearers with the address which banished him from the university for so many years. The School of Philosophy was established in Concord in that year by Mr. Alcott's friends, and there Mr. Emerson read Memory, and in the following year Aristocracy, to its assembled company. In 1880, it has been said, Mr. Emerson read his 100th lecture at his townsfolk in the Concord Lyceum. His last public reading was probably his paper on Carlyle, see Lectures and Biographical Sketches, before the Massachusetts Historical Society. It is a pleasant circumstance to remember that in his last years Mr. Emerson took from the study shelves the volumes of his own printed works. They seemed new to him, and when his daughter came in he looked up smiling and said, "Why, these things are really very good." To readers of these journals, talks of a poet and scholar, who was also a good citizen of the Republic, with himself in varying moods, the words of the East Indian Mozumdar may seem appropriate. Quote, "Yes, Emerson had all the wisdom and spirituality of the Brahmins. Brahmanism is an acquirement, a state of being rather than a creed." End quote. End of note. The end. This is the end of Journal Collection number 68, which is also the end of Volume 10, and therefore the end of the 10-volume collection of the journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson, which were edited by Edward Waldo Emerson and Waldo Emerson Forbes. Thank you for listening.